All right. Well, hello everybody. My name is Nux and I'm here with a Ritualist video. This time I wish to talk about more of the bit of a bugs that I found about the Ritualist, but mostly a big or bigger feedback video about the Ritualist itself, because I think there is a lot to talk about the Ritualist as well. I've been spending a lot of hours during the past days since the beta has started to play Ritualist and kind of trying other styles too early on, and then settling on one. To say it as a sort of a disclaimer, I guess, I want to mention that this is mostly about the support ritualist. I have tried on my own the power ritualist, which didn't really work out for me too much, and it felt a bit overly complicated compared to something like the Reaper, and performed way worse than I was expecting. So I will not really talk about the power ritualist itself or that really part, because I really have no experience trying much with that. I've seen, for example, Snowcrows doing some testing and some builds on that reached nearly reaching 40k DPS, which the way it plays, it didn't really felt good to. I mean, didn't feel good in a sense that when I checked out the videos that people were doing about the power ritualist or the quickness power ritualist, it didn't feel right to play that much. So I will not really talk about that one, but I do consider that too, obviously, because I do wish that the ritualist should be also a power alternative for the necromancer, because we mostly have basically Condi builds on the necromancer, honestly, for scourge, or core necromancer as well, and including harbinger as well, or just Conde Reaper as well, which works as for so far as well. And I I do have to mention early on that in general, mechanically speaking, the ritualist feels very right the way it is. And I do have to mention it right early on, just in case, anyone ever actually checks this as a actual feedback, including even the devs, which I highly doubt that it would happen. But just in to say, it feels right to play, mechanically speaking, not so much thematically. Mechanically speaking, it is very strong, and I actually find it very fun to play. It's very nice to play. It's not overly strict, like playing something else. Obviously, I kind of bring up my so-called Hillbinger build, which is absolute super strict, the way you have to rotate around your skills to keep up boons and everything. Ritualist compared to something like that or similar supports feel so much better, considering that I only, well, with my own playstyle with it, the one that I'm focusing on, which I shared in a previous video, the one that I play, which is mostly focusing on the boons itself and pumping out as much healing as possible. And I'm not really going on the Wilder's Boon build myself, because that feels a little bit more wonky for me. But going with that playstyle, it actually kind of feels alright. It's really not that bad, considering that the only focus you have, just as I mentioned in the build video, is basically just going into Shroud, slapping down your spirits and then basically getting out so you can auto rupture them, which is actually very nice. Speaking of bugs, or sort of bugs that I don't know if it's intentional or just buggy or not, there are like 3 or 4 things quickly that I can mention. Let me just think about it real quickly. First of all, which I have reported most of these already during the beta as bugs or potential bugs. The rupture tooltip doesn't update depending on your boon duration. So no matter if you have 100% or near 100% boon duration, the boons don't update on duration. So that's a minor thing. You have to keep in mind that it's only the tooltip. The boons itself actually do interact properly with the extra boon duration or concentration. So that's a good thing. The other thing that I mentioned previously as well, that you can very easily interrupt your spirits, and this is very frustrating if you have something like soul twisting, where you really want to do something like preservation of your first spirit and not waste it and have it on like a really long cooldown. You really don't want that, and so far this has been really frustrating, because my point, at least in my own build, in a more strict condition during strikes or such, or raids or anything, I really want to keep up a proper rotation on the spirits summoning as well. and this really makes it hard, where I can just accidentally interrupt constantly my spirits by just, you can see that it's like half of the cast bar is like nearly done, and then it just gets interrupted because I cast a other spirit or the other summon, and just completely interrupts it. The other minor bug, that you can notice if you've tried the Ritualist so far, is that sometimes these rupture skills stay active, or in the sense that you can click them and send them on cooldown even though they don't do anything when you're outside of Shroud and you have no spirits anymore. That's a minor bug. It's can be, if your fingers are on it, it can be annoying, because if you press it, it does send it on a actual cooldown, and the next time when you go into Shroud, it will not work because it is on technical cooldown. The other sort of bug, which I think it is actually a bug and it is not intended at all the way it is, that every weapon, I did mention this by the way in the build video just in case, that the weapon spells seem to have the wrong radius. Your Wells have 240 radius, and the weapon spells, all of them say that they have 300 range radius, which I can actually show it off even by just using the rings that I have. This is the 300 range radius, which is like, kind of like there, but even with like a well, if I slap it down, you can see that where it ends, and when I use a weapon spell, you can see where the white line is, where it gets applied to allies. So it is definitely bugged, and instead of having a 300 range radius, they actually have 240. So that's a bit of an annoying bug, because I was actually happy that Ritualist has a slightly larger range, or AoE range, than like Scourge and such, that is basically sitting on like even smaller circles in most of the cases. Because of that, this you kind of have to keep in mind that the range for the weapon spells are unfortunately much smaller than they are intended. Okay, I don't really recall any more sort of bugs right now from the top of my head. I think those were mostly the most annoying ones, but if I remember anything else, I will mention immediately. I don't think there was anything regarding the traits themselves, but we will see then. I will also talk about some traits that I don't think is really making much sense, but we will get there in time. There is, like I mentioned, there is a lot to talk about Ritualist, honestly. So first of all, I have to mention positives too and everything, but basically, just as I mentioned, mechanically, Ritualist feels right to play. It is strong to play, and it is almost like playing Chrono. Actually, the playstyle is actually more close to playing a Mesmer, just because of how you are almost forced to just do this, where you're just summoning the spirits and then you just rupture them for the boons. So it's almost like, how the Mesmer does, where you just like want to summon clones as much as you can and then just shatter them for like the longer boon durations that they give, and just keep spamming them over and over and over. It's basically the same playstyle, but it also reminds you of Scourge, where you always have to slap down a shade, basically like every X amount, like usually like every 8 seconds or so, you kind of want to slap down a shade and then press F3, F5, or like every second cycle, which is actually, to my build, is actually very close, considering that every second cycle I use Wanderlust and I don't use it more. However, I have to say that thematically, what Ritualist is, it doesn't make much sense to me, the way it plays and its own playstyle. Again, mechanically it's strong, but thematically speaking, it feels very kind of weird and just doesn't make much sense. Like, you have okay, so if you never played Guild Wars 1, obviously this comes from the Guild Wars 1 Ritualist, and in Guild Wars 1 Ritualist was a very strong support mainly. It was not really the best like nuker or like a spellcaster in terms of like like a damage dealer. Obviously you had builds on it, and you also had the spirit spamming one, where you would have a bunch of spirits attacking the same target and you just nuke the target. Yeah, you could do that, obviously it's not that. But talking about the spirits and their effects, they had one of the largest AoE effects, because they had spirit range, which was half of your compass in AoE range, which was like, let's say that you have like, just imagine that my spirits would have like a 1.5k range, basically. Like, actually I could technically show something like imagine me slapping down a spirit and you have a range like something like this, or like even beyond like 2000. Like, obviously that would be insane in terms of Guild Wars 2. That's not going to happen. But the point of the spirits in Guild Wars 1 for the supportive ones and the more defensive ones that were not actively attacking, they had a large radius of the effect they give. And they had very strong effects. Now in Guild Wars 2, now that you see, all they kind of seem to do is that you spawn them, and even if they linger, they do really nothing. They're attacking the air because they are programmed to do an attack every 3 seconds to the closest target. So if they find no attack or like no target, they are still keep attacking, but they attack just do nothing. But even then, like, I just technically, like, I don't know, it's just kind of weird because even like if you go into Shroud, you cannot do anything in Shroud. There is just, oh, okay, you can teleport. This is nice. Like, I like that because you have a movement ability inside Shroud, or like a basically shadow step. But what can you really do? Like, there is just summon the spirits. I can't really do Anguish right now because I need a target, but I don't want to be in combat right now. And that's it. You summon, and then what? You cannot heal. You cannot use your utilities. And at best, the only effect you have is just by having Spirit's Gift. When you summon a spirit, you will heal allies around you and remove conditions like 1. And like that's it. And of course, if you have the auto trait, then you provide quickness. Like that's it, the boons. But again, that is more related to the initial effects of basically summoning spirits. But apart from that, the spirits really do nothing. And I kind of sad about that they really do nothing. And I'm not wanting them to be a turret, because I really hate playstyle and class design where you summon effectively turrets, just like how Engineer has turrets, and they just like slap it down and they just exist and like attack, and it's so boring and so passive gameplay. It's absolutely, I don't like it. I know there are people who love that. There's no problem with that, but I think in terms of like a more like around a dynamic combat that you have in Guild Wars 2. This is such a lazy and like just counter design to what it is, that you just make a turret that you like and then you even have a kind of a pointless trait for it where they teleport to you every time before they auto attack or as they do their auto attacks. But again, like the auto attacks do really nothing. Even if you're power Ritualist, they do really nothing. And there is actually so much connected to this dude that I find problematic with the Ritualist itself, that you have like nothing that actually helps you out exactly. Everything is pretty much just around the spirits or the weapon spells, or just the effectiveness of the spirits basically. For example, I think that the spirits teleporting to you after their auto attacks should be just in spawning power, and this should be like some more fun, like minor trait that they should do. I don't really have problem with the others. And also Spirit's Gift, either Spirit's Gift or Soul Twisting, I think they should give a conversion, but I think it's more Spirit's Gift because that's more of the support trait line, very obviously, with the healing and condition removal. I think, more to say, my problem is that even Harbinger and Scourge and such have stats or traits, that technically increases your stats to help your role better or to be more effective. Now on Ritualist, you really don't have that. You have no flat stats, you have nothing like that really. And it's a little bit weird to me that Scourge, Harbinger and such have both either healing power or, condition duration, concentration for boon duration and such. I think Spirit's Gift, the way I would slightly rework it is that it should give maybe to a 10-to-1 ratio of concentration depending on how much healing power you have. So for every 10 healing power, you get 1 concentration. And I think if you get like 1,000 bonus healing power from gear or anything, it should just convert it into like a basically 10% concentration in total. So you could not go out, because right now you have to go out of your way to get 100% boon duration, and that feels so wrong. Because as a healer, I'm basically I'm not saying that I'm being punished for that, but like there is so little that I can do. Like, I have to use Rune of the Water, which is not the end of the world, obviously, but like, just the feel that I have to go out of my way so hard to actually go for Boon duration, while Scourge, Harbinger, that is not even technically a dedicated healer in a sense, especially not Harbinger, but even Harbinger gets so much more anyway. And then you have Scourge that just like outright gets 15% Boon duration by just having down a single shade, you know, because they get like 225 concentration and condition duration, basically, expertise. And that's just crazy to me that they get that freely, basically, by just doing their own mechanics. So to me, I had ideas, for example, that either just outright give us like a healing power to concentration conversion, but I would also enjoy that. The reason I don't really want that is because while it kind of defies, or you know, or rather denies, you know, DPS people using it for more duration, it also doesn't feel like right, because I also wish you would have a trait that gives you more healing power because you are on support. I do understand that we have lost rights already on the blood trait line, but just making it into a more support oriented, you know, like you can just feel that you are more about healing and supporting and booning people, you know, that will feel much more better. But I will be just happier with just a, you know, general healing power to concentration. I did had ideas, for example, that either Boon of Creation could also help, or no, sorry, that is a different idea. Like Soul Twisting could give you something where every single time you summon a spirit, it could give you just a flat 3% Boon duration. For a certain, you know, like 10 seconds or so, or maybe 15 seconds. I don't like the 10-second duration, because that also just incentivizes you to keep rolling into Shroud every 10 seconds and then leave as soon as possible because of the cooldown. So that like 10-second thing is always, it just doesn't feel right. Also, that's like all the other thing, not thematically speaking, but like mechanically speaking, the other thing that bothers me, that a lot of things are really tightly calculated, that you have a 10-second Shroud cooldown without alacrity, of course, and like everything just aligns right when you have alacrity, so that you can actually overlap the boons just fast enough with all your animations that you don't drop down or have boons fall off of you if you are a support. That just feels a bit wrong to me. I wish the boon durations by default will be a little bit longer, especially quickness. Not because it's hard to keep up quickness, don't misunderstand, but I wish it will be longer than just 3-second base, like 3-second base without boon duration. That's why you can see 6-second here, because I have technically 100% boon duration. But if we could change a couple of things, you know, thematically about the Ritualist, then I would definitely increase the quickness, so you are not... so the problem is that you basically are nearly completely forced to spam your spirits every time they are off cooldown with like whatever you can do, and that just feels so wrong to me, that you either do, you know, a double a double Wanderlust or double Preservation, or maybe double Anguish of course if you are like quick DPS or something. I don't know, it just doesn't feel right that much. Like, it just works out right now with the playstyle I figured out and, you know, just kind of felt comfortable with, because it isn't over complicated. But yeah, it's just, I don't know, it feels like the boon duration and most calculated things are very much calculated around having alacrity on you. But it's also just the fact again that like I am a healer, and I get it that I provide protection and vigor, but it's also heal, you know, it's also a huge heal, and I can't really just use it whenever the hell I want, you know. It's basically have to be in the rotation, which is in this case right now, again, with the playstyle I figured and I run, you know, and I made a video about it. You basically go into Shroud every basically 7.5 and 8 seconds, and then you immediately slap down a Preservation, which is like a 1 second delay to cast its own thing, and then it will just explode because you basically rupture it by leaving Shroud immediately. So like every 8 or 9 seconds or so, you keep rotating this huge heal amount that you do with all the boons, which feels nice, but it's also like, I kind of wish I could use Preservation or some big heal that it can provide whenever I want. But I also can't really complain about it that much, because on the other hand, to balance it out, your weapon spells, they are not attached to your, quickness upkeep or anything, or like boons and everything. Like obviously Weapon of Warding has some, regeneration and protection on them that you also provide, but you don't need it. So the good thing in the utility skills for Ritualist that I absolutely love so far is the fact that you're not needing to waste it for pointless rotation. It's genuinely something that you can just have here and almost never press it if you have to. Not saying that you don't have to press it because it's completely useless, but because you don't need it into your rotation. You can just, or the sort of healing rotation. I mean, you are not a DPS. I'm not talking about that, but usually healers still have a certain rotation, and this is why I'm liking this a bit more, because this makes the gameplay or the playstyle a little bit more reaction based rather than just having the usual rotation like most healers suffer from. Because I in my opinion, healers in Guild Wars 2 or heal support should be more of a reactive gameplay, like a reactive game that you do to whatever happens, you react to it. But instead in the game so far, most things like chrono and such, honestly chrono is a bit less, but it's kind of there a little bit. But Alacrity chrono or heal chrono kind of is the one where I can actually sit on a couple of my utilities without wasting them, actually use them, so kind of react to the fight and what's happening. And that's what I'm happy about too here with like Xenra's weapon or like Weapon of Warding. Actually it's super good that you can just keep them and think which one you want to use when. On like a fight that when something is going to happen, like a big boom where you can negate something. Like Xenra's weapon is actually very strong, even if you have no wielder's boon. It can be. I still don't justify the 75-second cooldown, because I will be honest, this is not a troubadour elite skill where you have literally just a full-on distortion for everyone that just negates every sort of damage, albeit you still can get CC'd and such in most cases, or some specific boss skills will still kill you or like damage you, which is fine as it is though, even though I don't find much logic in that, because whatever, that's a very different topic. But I feel like with testing or trying out more about Xenra's weapon, I feel like I really feel like the 60-second base cooldown will be more justifiable than 75, because of how the effect actually reacts with thing. Like for example, you can only on yourself, you can only basically take 2 certain big damage or 2 damage repeatedly immediately that will just eat it up. Meanwhile, compare it to something like the Troubadour Elite, which is also I think like 75 second or so seconds cooldown, or maybe just 70. I'm actually not sure anymore. What was it exactly? I tried out for a couple of minutes or some testing before with the Mesmer. But the fact that you just outright distortion everything for 2 seconds, which can be almost nearly any attacks, any amount of attacks that can be rapidly, thrown at the group itself, is kind of crazy to me. And then you have Xenra's weapon, which on the allies, by normal case, without Wielder's Boon, is just 1 stack. And nearly any effect will eat it up, because it triggers on any damage that is larger than 5% of people's health, which is technically almost any damage, because everyone is DPS in my group. So any just a sneeze from a boss will trigger it immediately. And then compare it to something like, again, the distortion, where for 2 seconds you just eat up any damage and become immune to it. Meanwhile, this one, it does provide 1 stack of stability for 8 seconds, cool, or like 4 seconds by default. And break stun, I think it only nearby and break them out. Okay, so it does AoE stun break allies too, but I don't think you really want to waste this for an AoE stun break, unless you know that right after the stun, actually probably one of the best example here where I will think of something where you want to stun break the group or your subgroup and then have the effect on you, is actually Bone Skinner, for example, that can come up to me immediately. Because if you get stuck in Bone Skinners, that like cone shouting attack, where it does it like breath attack kind of thing, and you get knocked down to the ground, as soon that finishes, you get the puddle immediately under you. So if you have a minor lag, you are immediately killed by the puddle. But if you use this and break out everyone from that stun and also provide that like 1 stack of stability just in case, then also if they still stay in the puddle and take 1 tick of damage from that, you know, like the initial AoE damage from it, then it will still save them. I actually tried this out on Bone Skinner like 2 or 3 times so far, and it's okay. I'm not. The problem is that I do not know if it's the weapon that kind of saves them, because I have seen people standing in the puddles, popping on them, and they're still rolling out with like half a health. And I do not know if it's because we spread the bubbles too much, or because Zinri's weapon saved them. Because they didn't seem to lose health, but they were also not dodging, which what the weapon does, that you basically heal back almost the same amount of health that what you take if it's above 5% health, which can be very... I can just show real quick, because I tested it right. I need my other no gear thing, and I can just show you here what I mean by that. It is extremely threatening, and let me just activate it. So if I go into it, I take this much damage. If I had 2 stacks on me and go in, it just heals me back, and then I can take damage again. It doesn't exactly heal back the same amount of damage, but it also siphons health, so you technically can go over a little bit with the health siphoning effect at least. And it's just kind of nice, but it's still, I don't know, I will be very real, it's still compared to something like Mesmer, which always seems to lately get the better end of certain deals, in my opinion, it's not justifiable. I will still, at the worst case, give it 6-second cooldown, because of how easy it is to waste the effect itself. Meanwhile, I do understand that, you know, the distortion, the AoE elite distortion on Troubadour has a 1 second cast time, sorry. But 2 seconds, dude, like 2 seconds of distortion of being nearly immune to any sort of attack is just insane to me. Which was also a old thing that they removed from Mesmer, and now they brought back onto an elite. And then on Ritualist you get this. I'm not complaining, you know, in the sense that like, oh, it is just so, you know, oh, injustice, unfair. I'm just saying that, like, to me, the cooldown is not justified to the effect, and it should be, I'm not saying to be stronger, because it definitely shouldn't, because the effect that what it does is definitely strong enough when it triggers on the right thing. But, you know, I feel like the only thing if I could change on it will be either the cooldown, or make it so that the health threshold is either 15 or 20% when it triggers. So you can basically eliminate the small nothing attacks that like mobs do. Because the fact that, let's say a elementalist has like 14k health on average, then if you take just 1.5k damage, that is 10% of your health. That's like what normal mobs do, like normal attacks of a mob. Like on Bone Skinner, you know, like all those little pesky little shades that like spawn around that keep like launching projectiles at the entire group, which can kind of melt you very fast eventually. Like even those just immediately eat it up, because even those just deal like 1.5-2k damage per shot into people. And while, yeah, it can, you know, save your life, because it can just negate those 2 shots, even though they shoot like 3 projectiles or so every single few seconds. I feel like me being able to almost guarantee that my effect, or the Zinri's weapon effect, doesn't get eaten up by something minor like that, and instead it gets eaten up by, let's say, when the Bone Skinner, you know, leaves back into the middle and then does this like huge AoE damage, or when, you know, when typically the party doesn't stay out of the Bone Skinner's way when it runs away from the group to the brazier thing. And then people just eat up all the damage it does while rushing through them, and it just downs several people. When I could use that, it would be great, but it also triggers on the ticking AoE damage as well a lot of times. So yeah, it's kind of weird. So like other point, I would just rather use Weapon of Warding or something. I really don't know. Weapon of Warding is balanced as it is, in my opinion, considering that it is not a Aegis but an actual weapon effect that you cannot Boon Rip either, or lose it by any Boon Rip, you know, like by any boss or such. That is great. I think Weapon of Warding is completely good as it is. It has just a meaningful cooldown as well. Weapon of Remedy is just right as it is, in my opinion. It's very well balanced. Nightmare Weapon is actually very fun to use as like a quick heal on the party as well, to use on the side. And because of that, I can kind of justify having resilient weapon as well, because it's kind of fun to have that like damage reduction effect, or you know, below half a health there is 20% damage reduction. It's actually very fun in that sense. And the other things like so basically the weapon spells are sort of just right, except for, again, like mostly Zinra's weapon. I actually feel like that resin weapon should be a bit of a lower cooldown, but then I mean, I really don't know. I think resin weapon should have a 20-second cooldown, just for the reason behind it is mostly just because it's a very small AoE. It only gets given to people on the spot around you, and then they can of course run away. So it's kind of the opposite of, you know, Well of Blood, where people have to stand in it to actually get the healing effect and the regen from it. But it also doesn't provide boons or anything, you know. The only thing it provides is that, you know, smaller damage reduction, which is, yes, it's not that small, because technically speaking 10 and 20% is nearly a free protection. Well, mostly 20% is almost a like an almost protection effect, you know, with like 33% damage reduction from like direct damage. But I don't think it is affected by, you know, condition damage or anything like that, just direct damage. And the healing is kind of like mid, really. It's not the best healing, obviously. It's strong on you, but not really on your allies, and it just only has 3 ticks on your allies. So they are like basically just right. So my only feedback is basically on Resident Weapon, where I think that 20% or 20-second cooldown should be more justifiable, and Xena's weapon should be at best or sort of worst case 60-second cooldown. And if not, then just make it so that the health threshold where it triggers is either 15 or like 20%, or worst case 25. So it can almost guarantee that only triggers on damage that is much larger than just like a normal mob, just like just slightly sneezing at you. Like 5% health threshold to trigger is insanely small. Literally anything triggers it, and that's my sort of problem, because this should be something that I want to press when a big hit is coming in, and I can guarantee it is great that they are both instant with like Weapon of Warding, but again, I think it could be slightly adjusted in numbers without making it broken, in my opinion. But again, this is for PvE perspective. I'm not talking about PvP, you know, versus for as such. Like that's I don't play that. I'm mostly meaning all of these in PvE, as I mentioned, strike raids and such, or you know, fractals and whatnot. I pretty much have that. Now, again, going back to like thematics and traits. Wandering Spirits, I don't think it should be a trait alone. I think it should be just in spawning power by default, or just should be by default, I think, for the spirits. Also, Lingering Spirits, I think this should not exist. My one feedback, because of the thematics of Ritualist, again, as I mentioned, that the spirits basically just get spawned and then like you just like, it's just funny to me that in Guild Wars 1, you know, you spawn the spirits and they actively, you want them to keep up around because of their strong effects they have around them, and you like keep them alive as long as possible. And then you also have the old Soul Twisting build in Guild Wars 1 as well, because in Guild Wars 1, Soul Twisting, what it does is that the next X amount of spirits you use will be instantly recharged, and they cost less energy, you know, less resource to cast them. So you can just basically almost permanently keep them up, because Soul Twisting has very, very low cooldown, like 20 or 25 seconds cooldown, or maybe 15 or something. I can't really recall from the top of my head. And that was the point in Guild Wars 1. Now in Soul Twisting here is a little bit different, but still thematically almost there. But you are like, while I don't want turret gameplay, I still wish something like Preservation would have a lingering AoE that it just keeps up, just like the old defensive spirits that don't attack, that they just stay there where you are, and maybe you can use, you know, some other skills or whatever, or even just be around it, or maybe teleport them with you with like summon spirits, of course, just like the old days. And it should by default they should linger. I don't think that the rupture mechanic is exactly the best for this. So thematically speaking about the entire like spirits and everything, obviously like I mentioned, I don't want turret gameplay, but I think they should still have like a fixed duration that they linger after you summon them, whether or not you are in Shroud. The fact that you have to go into Shroud, I have no much of a problem, but it's also like, what's the point of having a shroud that can eat up damage when the only thing you want to do here is just, again, just summon spirits and then leave? It's also like there is no point having life force because, again, you're just there for like 1 second to summon the spirits right now, you know, which is, again, mechanically speaking right now, sure, it works. It's strong. It works. I don't mind, but I'm kind of sad that, you know, you don't exactly do what a Ritualist did back in Guild Wars 1. I'm not saying to copy one-on-one, obviously that would be insane, just wouldn't work with this game. But the fact that they don't linger by default is just kind of weird. So one of the idea I had was, what if they would linger for a base 15-second duration or 12 seconds, for example? So they could have an initial effect that they do, and then they keep using like every 3 seconds, you know, you slap them down, they do immediately their effect, basically the summon effect, and then they just, you know, for example, just going on preservation itself. Imagine that you slap it down and it just keeps sitting there. It doesn't auto attack, but it keeps pulsing boons and some healing periodically every 3 seconds. Not saying that, like, you know, it should do a nuke healing, but they could also remove the nuke heal from the initial cast, give it some minor healing, like a, I don't know, like a 3,500 healing or something, because you also have, technically speaking, you will have transfusion, which also triggers shield blades immediately. Like currently, I feel like preservation's healing, with all the effects that you do or can do, is very much an overkill, at least on PvE perspective right now, with this build at least. It kind of feels like an overkill. It can heal a lot when it's really needed though, so I do appreciate that one. But it also feels that like you waste it like 95% of the time, which just, I don't know, a bit feels wrong, because you just keep spamming it for the boons anyway, so you never use preservation when it's actually needed. You just use it because the boons. And then you also just basically rupture it anyway. So yeah, the idea I had, for example, was that some people I think also came up, probably very obviously because it's very obvious solution in a sense to me, that you could make it just that they are by default, when you summon them, they exist for like 12 seconds. It still promotes, or, you know, incentivizes more active gameplay rather than just like slap it down and just exist for you know, 60 seconds or like a minute, I mean, you know, and it just like does its own thing. No. But definitely, you know, the devs seemingly want to push you to actually press skills and actually actively do something. But I think this can be done much better on Ritualist, especially since you have a more reactive gameplay with your utilities, which I'm, by the way, absolutely appreciated the hell out of it, because I love it that I don't have to spam my utilities just because, oh, I have to provide quickness. Oh, quickly, you have to do the rotation, you know. But it's also weird that there are spirits that they have an initial effect that you want, but you do them for the quickness, because you have to provide quickness and the boons, which they can provide really great. I don't want to lose the boons. I'm so happy that finally we have an elite spec, a support elite spec, especially like a mainly support elite spec in my opinion, for Necro, that finally can actually like crap out boons. And it's not better than Scourge in any sense really. Boon wise, slightly better than Scourge, yes, but it feels, it sort of has a different gameplay, but also not so much for now. But that's why I'm kind of trying to give ideas that I think they could give something like a 12-second duration for the spirits when you spawn them, and just make them automatically linger. And if you have something that makes them teleport you when they attack, then just make it so that something like Anguish teleports only to you, you know, to kind of balance it out, that, you know, the defensive one stays behind and you have to respawn it. But in that case, I think they should have a lower cooldown. Not because, you know, oh, I definitely want lower cooldowns because, oh, just you know, makes it so much more broken. No, I don't want the elite spec to be broken, because then you will just get nerfs and nothing else really, and I don't really want that. But imagine preservation that you slap it down, does immediately its initial effect that is separate from the passive, you know, pulsing effect, and then instead of having the rupture, imagine if you could just pulse, I don't know, certain boons from it, like regeneration, like currently it gives protection, vigor, but like imagine if it would just keep pulsing that basically. Like normally you could do, let's say that, I mean, because actually it's kind of correct right now, because it has by default 2 seconds of vigor and protection, so it, because of 100% you know, boon duration, I get 4 seconds. So imagine if it would just pulsing these, or like every 3 seconds you get 3 seconds of protection. I mean, you will overcap protection just from transfusion and shield blades either way, but it could help out with like vigor and still keep a protection a little bit, but it could maybe provide like a minimal amount of regeneration, even though you can overcap regeneration by just the staff anyway. But you know, let's not put everything onto staff all the time, you know. Like, you shouldn't just rely on the staff that like, oh, you have the staff so you will always have permanent regen and vigor. I think they should diverse a bit more, that the spirits also can do that, so you can have other weapons too a little bit beside you. So when you swap to something else, like pistol or a dagger, warhorn offhand, then you can still, you know, provide those boons and not needing to sweat that you have to swap back as fast as possible to keep, you know, overcapping regen and whatnot, just in case you forgot about it or such, or like, you know, protection with the things or whatever. So lingering, you know, having the spirits linger for like a fixed duration after being summoned should be more healthy, and then they could do like, at least preservation could do this 3-second pulsing effects with some boons, could do minor like a 1k 1.5k healing, you know, pulls around, so it helps out as well, and then just lower the initial nuke heal to something like half of its amount, you know, and then it can just pulsing, because a 3-second pulsing is still great there to have a sustain, because right now if you have the utility for healing, is basically the only guaranteed healing you can get is basically nightmare weapon if people are actually attacking, or resident weapon where they have to be around you anyway. So while I was editing, I kind of had a couple of ideas for this, you know, idea on the lingering spirits, which could help out on the, you know, a bit of a class uniqueness in a sense, to make it feel a bit more unique, or sort of, you know, playing onto that. Like, I had the idea, for example, what if the anguish, basically the idea kind of came up with, you know, thinking that like how the troubadour also providing is like unique bonuses to certain effects, like, you know, like doing more damage, like percentage damage and such for the party as well. Like, imagine if, for example, the anguish spirit, if all three could linger without, you know, being in the shroud. Imagine if spawning the anguish while it exists around as well while attacking, it could also provide like a unique, you know, like a 300 radius AoE around itself, where it keeps refreshing a 3-second buff on the group all the time, instead of just being like, you know, like a straight up 12-second buff or something. Like every 3 seconds, each spirit could provide a unique buff that is not, in my opinion, overkill. But for example, Anguish could provide a, I don't know, let's say 5% strike damage increase, or mostly thinking about strike damage increase, because the Ritualist is, again, like I mentioned, it's more power and super related, but the Anguish could help out with that too, and it could fit into the super roll too, where you slap it down and you basically can provide that sort of, you know, damage buff to the party. It kind of plays into the class identity too, in my opinion, with like the actual like old school, you know, defensive, little bit offering some offensive buffs around the spirits. And then let's say there is Wanderlust, they could also make it so that instead of, you know, preservation, it is actually Wanderlust that is providing the stability, pulsing it around itself. Like, you know how the Wanderlust is mostly designed, or, you know, thematically designed around providing CC and stunning, and, or like, you know, well, dazing and knocking down the target and then fearing when you rupture it. It could instead be the one providing, like, let's say 2 stacks of stability every 3 seconds for, like, you know, 2 or 3 seconds. So you could keep stacking it as well, because if you have boon duration, you could make it into 6 seconds. So you can still stack it a little bit, but you are not going overkill on the stability either on the one if you play, like, you know, something else. And then it could be, you know, thematically still fitting, because Wanderlust is the CC one, and it could provide your allies the one that can be against the CC, which is stability, for example. And then there is preservation, that I had the idea that what if preservation could, you know, provide a unique boon that could either like increase the incoming healing on everyone who has that buff, or even, you know, reduce damage taken by like 5 to 10% or such, which could be still fitting, you know, because it kind of reminds you of the old Union or something. I know this is preservation, which is more about the healing originally, but just, you know, kind of trying to throw out ideas that like is more unique, that is not necessarily a boon all the time, but more unique, and, you know, seeing the other elite specs also getting a couple of unique buffs that they can provide that is not a boon, but just outright, you know, or you deal a few percent more damage, few percent more condition damage, you do more, few percent healing output and such. I think it could absolutely fit in and could provide a sort of a class uniqueness and identity to it too, especially with the spirit idea. So that's the other thing that I wanted to add to it. Also, soul twisting, in my opinion, the way it is, if they don't change the spirits ever, or they never, if they will never linger outside of having lingering spirits, I think soul twisting should give something else as well. Just as I mentioned, like maybe there should be like boon duration here, but soul twisting feels like the one that focuses around the boon currently, or the boons and the boon spam. So I think it deserves something, a minor extra effect to it, rather than just like, oh yeah, your first spirit, just recharges, which is cool. But yeah, the quickness thing about, I'm kind of happy that it's on the, the spirits in a sense, but it's also not so much, because it makes you always, it makes you want to spirit spam for no reason really. So you basically waste their effects mostly when you don't need it, most likely. I think Boon of Creation should give basically 2 stacks of might on top of it, which would help out both power Ritualist and Boon, super Ritualist with might a little bit, because currently might is very tight, because it's very calculated around your 2 rotations of Shroud, around Anguish, So I think having 2 sets of might with 8 seconds of baseline duration should be very healthy. A lot of other elite specs have that as well, and it's not the end of the world with it. Like, might should be very generic boon, in my opinion. It's not the end of the world, but it could absolutely help you out whenever you summon a spirit. You could actually, I'm even willing to say that whenever you summon a spirit and when you rupture them, if they keep the rupture, they should provide might, like genuinely a good 8 to like 10-second might they should be provided. Now to talk about a bit more about, like the rupture skills regarding the spirits, if they would linger, how it would work. I think it shouldn't be a rupture skill where you want to kill the spirit. I think it should be like, it's a bit hard to think, because if they make it lingering with like, the preservation having its initial effect and then keeps pulsing boons and minor hail, I still think it should be something that reacts with your spirits instead of just killing your spirits. Like, currently it's very funny though, still to me, that you basically like do the hula to summon the spirit and just arise, and then the first thing you tell it is basically kill yourself. That's feels a bit too funny to me, but it's I don't know, it's whatever. But I think to just have their effects either be slightly stronger or like interact with the spirits, that like, it's kind of what I want. I want it to interact with the spirit in some sense. I'm not outright just saying that like, it should just redo its initial casting effect and have like a 15-second cooldown on it, so you can not exactly spam it, but then also you like, it's not really gonna align, because I don't want to lose stability and like all these things, because you can pretty much keep them up if you play right or play very, very tightly with the rotation. You can keep up almost permanent stability, and that's very nice. But definitely something that can interact with it and still provide these boons on a meaningful cooldown with a meaningful duration. In a sense, I don't mind the rupture things, but the fact that all the good boons and the essential boons are tied to the rupture just means that they incentivize you to immediately rupture your spirits for the boons instead of holding on to them or do something with them, which actually kind of doesn't matter anyway, because if you leave Shroud right now, you will rupture the spirits anyway, which just feels weird. So that's the sort of thing that I have with the Ritualist right now. Definitely some traits could change. Also, honestly, instead of Wandering Spirits here, having this, it should be another, thematically speaking, another weapon spell, kind of like minor trait that they could do. I unfortunately do not have any idea right now what it could be. Maybe if you pick it, you have 20% increased effectiveness on what the weapon spell does. Maybe the problem is I don't know, because numbers wise, it can be too strong if you do something where you just outright enhance the effectiveness of the weapon spells, especially if you have Builder's Boon. But I feel like the top trait line is pretty much a PvP versus world trait line to me, less of a support or like DPS trait line to me, honestly. While the middle is like more like a heal support, mostly, which is kind of weird, by the way, that the middle trait line goes like this, and then you have lingering spirits here that has, in my opinion, has nothing to do with like being support. And then soul twisting seems to work the best with like support if you are focusing on boons and the healing. Definitely viewless boon also works with like the support, by the way. I know that it works, but I feel like it struggles more with the boons because of it. So that's kind of it, honestly. I'm not sure with the others. It kind of works as they work. I think they could be skewed a little bit around with some numbers or maybe with some extra effects to them. It feels a bit too simple. Again, I'm kind of missing the entire like concentration, like some extra flat stats to just help your role that they're supposed to be on that trait line. Like, you know, that trait line, you know, that like that trait line should be like DPS, the other one should be support, and the other one should be just like whatever you want to have, and it should just promote that one, you know. So that's why I'm feeling a bit weird about there's no concentration and such. Not to mention that the might idea, like I mentioned, should help out globally both power and the support ritualist with some self, you know, generated boon for the party as well, instead of being so selfish, I guess. Well, okay, I mean, obviously it is not so selfish because of the, you know, the anguish, AoE might and fury and everything, but I think, you know, on power ritualists, you kind of just want to spam anguish. I'm not sure. The others feel like it's much of a waste just because of their auto attacks even, and they just keep spamming anguish and just rupture it, like have it auto attack and then rupture it for the extra attacks and boons. So yeah, it's like thematically really not there yet in my opinion, but definitely works mechanically for the ritualist so far. I am still happy how it is, even if it stays as is. I am I can't say that I will be disappointed or angry about it. I'm just a little bit thematically, you know, kind of like, it's not really there, but it is what it is, you know. I don't want drastic changes because I enjoy what it can do right now. I do not wish to lose the boons. I'm not saying that it's giga strong, because I will be absolutely honest, I play a heal chrono as well. Heal chrono still outperforms any of this in my opinion in boons, and much easier boon uptime, especially with like troubadour eventually as well. It's just crazy with the AoE distortion and everything as well. Not saying that they are the best of the best healers in a sense of like healing output, which you can provide, but finally I'm happy with what Ritualist is regardless. But kind of wish, you know, thematically, so the playstyle, what you play is kind of feels a bit unique, what I'm kind of hoping for or wishing for. But if it doesn't happen again, it is what it is. So that's all my opinion and sort of feedback on the entire Ritualist so far. I don't think I forgot mentioning anything. That's basically what it is. I think the only thing that I can just mention very shortly is that with the current playstyle it has, that the Shroud has no meaning to be in. Actually, that was one thing that I want to talk about too, that like, but I think I mentioned because of the spirits that being in Shroud, there's no point being in Shroud because you just summon the spirits. So having that or like soul reaping or anything else kind of doesn't make sense here, because really, other than maybe vital persistence or like fear of death or something, you really don't need eternal life, because you almost never use your like life force. And even if you use it, you know, Boon of Creation will spam, like, you know, spam you with like some extra life force when you enter it and just summon spirits, and then you just leave immediately. So you can't even use it really actively for like just soaking up damage, because there's no point to it, because you can just summon spirits in it, and then it will just screw up your like entire rotation about the boons. So yeah, you know, it is what it is. We will see how it will change, but that's my complete feedback about the Ritualist, and I try to give some ideas. Definitely probably not the best, and probably other people have some better ideas, very likely, but you know, trying as well, because I really enjoy it so far, and I want it to be good, and I don't want it to be nerfed or like, you know, having these huge issues about boon uptime, healing and such. So that's it for this one, because it's been very long. It's almost an hour, so I'm gonna go now. Bye everyone.